They say time heals everything. But 10 years later, I still flinch when someone mentions faith. I wasn't always like this. There was a time when I prayed every night, believed every word my father preached. But grief has a strange way of changing what you believe in, especially when it's your own family that breaks your heart. My name's Ethan, and this is a story I never planned to tell. It's about a father who preached strength, a mother who prayed through pain, and a son who learned that silence can be louder than any sermon. If you've ever wondered how faith survives when everything else falls apart, this is for you. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood on Sycamore Lane, the kind of place where every lawn was trimmed just right, and every neighbor knew the name of your dog but never your secrets. My family fit right in. From the outside, we looked perfect: two loving parents, a younger sister who adored ballet, and me, the older son who was supposed to make them proud. But if you lived behind those walls long enough, you'd know that perfect was just another word for silent. My father, Charles, was a pastor. He preached about grace every Sunday, yet anger was the only gospel he lived by. My mother, Evelyn, was the kind of woman who smiled through pain, polite, disciplined, and terrifyingly loyal to the image my father built for us. To him, appearances were everything. To me, truth was the one thing I couldn't stop chasing. I think it started falling apart when I was 17. I'd just gotten accepted into an art school, something I'd been secretly dreaming of for years. My father didn't see art as a gift, he saw it as rebellion. The church doesn't raise dreamers, he said that night, his voice echoing through the dining room like a curse. It raises servants of God. I remember staring at my untouched plate, wondering how serving God could mean killing who I really was. That night ended with shouting, mine first, then his. A slap. My mother's silence. And the sound of my little sister crying in the hallway. The next morning, my father stood by the front door with my suitcase. If you think you're old enough to choose sin over family, he said, then you can live with your choices. And just like that, I was gone. No hugs. No goodbyes. Just a 17-year-old kid with a sketchbook, $50, and a world that suddenly felt too big. The first few years on my own were a blur of cheap apartments, cold dinners, and sketchbooks filled with half-finished dreams. I wasn't chasing success back then, just survival. Rent, ramen, repeat. But every night when I came home to silence, it hit me, I had traded a home that didn't want me for a freedom that didn't know what to do with me. Sometimes, I'd stare at the ceiling and think about the words my father threw at me that last night. You'll regret this, boy. You'll see what the world does to dreamers. And I did see it. The world didn't care. It chewed you up quietly, through overdraft fees, through landlords who didn't fix the heater, through people who promised exposure instead of pay. But it also taught me something my father never could: resilience without validation. I learned to wake up even when no one was watching. To build something even when nobody said, good job. It's funny how being unwanted can become fuel if you burn it right. I picked up jobs wherever I could find them: washing dishes, painting murals on the sides of diners, sketching caricatures for tourists at the Santa Monica Pier. Every now and then, someone would ask about my family. I'd lie and say we still talked sometimes. It was easier than explaining the truth, that I'd been erased from the family photos like a bad memory. Social media was my only window into that old life. Every Sunday, my mom would post photos from church, my father shaking hands with the pastor, my sister in white dresses, her smile wide and unbroken. They looked perfect. Polished. And there I was, covered in paint, living paycheck to paycheck, wondering if the silence between us had somehow become the only thing keeping me alive. There were nights when I'd almost hit call. When the loneliness got heavy enough to make me forget the years of silence. But then I'd remember that look on my father's face, that mix of disgust and pity, and my thumb would freeze midair. Forgiveness felt like a language I'd never learned. Still, time has a way of softening things. After 5 years, the anger turned into distance. After 7, the distance turned into indifference. And after 10, I convinced myself I'd outgrown the need for family entirely. I started to build something real: a small art studio, a few steady clients, enough income to pay rent and feed Oliver, my cat, who was the only creature I fully trusted. I thought I was healing. I really did. But healing isn't the same as peace, it's just the absence of bleeding. Then, one morning, out of nowhere, I got that email. Subject line: it's Mom. My chest tightened before I even opened it. Ethan, I don't know if this address still works. Your father's been sick. He won't admit it, but he's dying. He talks about you sometimes, mostly in anger, but I can see guilt in his eyes. I don't expect you to forgive him. But if you can, please come home before it's too late. I read that message 100 times. My first reaction wasn't sadness, it was confusion. I didn't know which hurt more, that my father was dying, or that it took his dying for them to remember I existed. For 2 whole weeks, I did nothing. I didn't reply. Didn't tell anyone. I just sat there every night, rereading that email until the words started to blur. Part of me wanted to go, to look him in the eye and see if he still thought I was worthless. The other part of me wanted to delete it and let the silence finish what it started 10 years ago. But one night, I dreamed of my sister. She was standing on our old porch, crying the same way she did the night I left. It didn't feel like memory, it felt like a calling. The next morning, I booked a one-way ticket back home. I arrived back in my hometown on a cold November morning. The air smelled like rain and old memories, the kind that cling to your clothes long after you leave. Mom had passed away a week earlier. Cancer, they said. Peaceful, they said. But nothing about it felt peaceful when I stood in that quiet church watching her photograph framed by lilies. Dad stood in the front row, rigid as ever, one hand gripping the back of the pew like it was the only thing keeping him upright. When he saw me, his face froze. For a moment, I thought he might walk away. But instead, he just nodded. A polite, wordless nod, as if I were some distant relative who'd flown in out of duty, not his only son. We didn't talk much that day. Just a few empty words about travel, work, the weather. Nothing about her. Nothing about the years we lost. That night, I stayed in my old room, dusty, smaller than I remembered, like time had shrunk it. I found one of Mom's old Bibles on the nightstand. Inside, between the pages, was a note in her handwriting. Ethan, don't let the silence between you and your father become a wall. God can still build something out of broken bricks. I stared at that line for a long time. It felt like she'd written it just for this moment, like she knew we'd both come back here, broken in our own ways, pretending we were fine. That night, I didn't sleep. I just lay there listening to the house creak, to Dad moving around downstairs, to the ghost of everything we never said. I didn't know it yet, but the next day would change everything. Because the next day, I'd finally sit down across from him, at the same table we'd both avoided for 10 years, and the truth would come pouring out. It was a Sunday evening, one of those forced family dinners my sister insisted on having ever since Mom passed. The first one since Dad came home from the hospital. He was thinner now, slower, but still trying to play the role, the head of the table, the one who holds it all together. We all knew he was fragile, but no one said it out loud. That's how our family worked. We never said things out loud. The kind where everyone pretends things are fine, smiles a little too wide, and talks about everything except what really matters. I wasn't planning to say anything that night. I told myself I'd just eat, nod, and leave early like I always did. But somewhere between the mashed potatoes and the awkward small talk about football, something in me broke. Dad had just finished saying grace, thanking God for keeping our family strong through tough times. And that's when it hit me, how absurd that sounded. Because we weren't strong. We were barely holding together. We were a house built on silence, pretending not to see the cracks in the walls. So I put my fork down. And I said, quietly at first, Dad, can I ask you something? He looked up, polite, cautious, that same distant calm he's always had. Of course, son. What's on your mind? And then it all came out. Why is it, I said, my voice shaking, that every time something bad happens, we just act like it's God's plan, like that makes it okay? The room froze. My sister's hand stopped midair. Dad blinked, confused. Ethan. No, I cut him off. You always say we have to trust God, but you never feel anything, do you? You never talk about Mom. You never admit how much it hurt. You just pray it away. His jaw tightened. That's not fair, he said. But I couldn't stop. 10 years of swallowed words were clawing their way out. Do you know what it was like, watching her die while you just stood there quoting scripture? I could feel my chest tightening, my throat burning. I needed a dad who could cry with me, not a pastor who told me to keep the faith. My sister whispered, Ethan, please, but I wasn't done. You think faith means pretending everything's fine. But faith isn't silence, Dad. It's honesty. It's breaking down and still choosing to believe there's something left after the wreckage. He didn't answer. He just stared at me, the kind of stare that hides a storm behind it. Then he finally said, quietly, you think I didn't cry? You think I didn't question God every single night after she was gone? You were asleep, Ethan. You didn't hear me. The room fell dead silent. He leaned back, eyes glistening, the first time I'd ever seen him like that. I lost my wife, he said, his voice trembling. And I was terrified that if I showed it, you'd lose your faith too. And just like that, the anger drained out of me. For a second, I didn't see the stoic man who hid behind Bible verses. I saw a broken father doing the only thing he knew how, holding it together so I wouldn't fall apart. Nobody spoke for a while. The only sound was the soft ticking of the old wall clock Mom used to love. Finally, my sister reached across the table and said, "Maybe we all lost each other a long time ago." Something shifted in that room. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was the first honest silence we'd shared in years. Not the empty kind. The kind that breathes. That night, after everyone left, Dad found me standing outside by the porch. He put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Son, faith isn't pretending not to feel pain. It's trusting that God can handle it when you finally admit you do." And for the first time in a decade, I believed him. The next morning, the house felt heavier than it had the night before. The smell of old coffee lingered in the air, and the faint echo of last night's argument still hung in my head like static. I'd spent most of the night awake, sitting on the porch as the first light crept over the horizon, thinking about everything that had been said, and everything that hadn't. For years, I'd imagined what I'd say if I ever got the chance to face them all again. I pictured it ending with apologies, maybe even hugs. But what I got was silence. And maybe that's okay. Because silence, I realized, is also an answer. When I went back inside, my dad was already up. He sat at the kitchen table, staring into a cup of coffee like he was trying to read the future in it. The man looked older, smaller somehow. Not because of time, but because of the weight of things he'd never said. He didn't look up when I poured my own cup, but his voice broke the stillness. "You remind me of her," he said. "Your mother. The way you stand there, thinking before you speak." It was the first real thing he'd said to me in a decade. No sarcasm. No criticism. Just truth, raw and quiet. I didn't know what to say. For years I'd built walls so high that even kindness felt like a trick. But when he looked up, his eyes were wet. And for the first time in my life, I saw the man behind the father, flawed, proud, but human. We talked for hours. Not about money, or the business, or what I'd become. Just about her. About how she used to hum when she cooked. About the way she'd make him laugh when he tried to act tough. We didn't fix everything, some things can't be fixed, but something shifted. Maybe forgiveness doesn't come all at once. Maybe it's just the moment you stop keeping score. When I finally left that house, I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. I felt tired, but lighter. Like I'd been carrying a backpack full of bricks for 10 years and had finally set it down. The drive back to my place took 3 hours, and I didn't turn on the radio once. Just the sound of the road, the hum of the tires, and the quiet realization that I didn't need their approval anymore. Because the life I'd built, the house, the business, the people who truly respected me, that was real. And it was mine. A week later, I stood on the porch of my own home, overlooking the lake I'd built with my own 2 hands. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the water gold. My crew had just finished a long project, and a few of them were staying over for barbecue and beers. Real people. People who showed up not because of blood, but because of loyalty. One of them, Travis, handed me a cold beer and said, "Man, you ever think about how far you've come?" I laughed. Every damn day. We clinked bottles, and I looked out over the land, the same land that used to feel like an escape, now finally felt like home. Not because of what it was worth, but because of what it represented, freedom. I used to think revenge would make me feel whole. That if they could just see me succeed, they'd understand my worth. But the truth is, you don't heal by proving them wrong. You heal by no longer needing to. As the stars started to appear, I whispered a quiet thank you, not to them, but to the younger version of me who refused to quit, who kept building even when no one believed in him. Somewhere deep down, I think Mom would have been proud. And for the first time in a long, long while. That was enough. You know. Life has a strange way of teaching us what really matters. Sometimes it does it gently. And sometimes it takes everything away before we finally see it. For years, I thought success would heal the wounds my family left behind. I thought if I could build enough, earn enough, prove enough, maybe they'd finally see me. But healing doesn't come from being seen. It comes from learning to see yourself. Clearly, kindly, and without the weight of their judgment. Family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes it's the ones who show up. Who stand beside you when life turns rough. Who believe in your worth even when the world turns its back. That night, as I stood under the stars, I realized something Mom once wrote was true. God can still build something out of broken bricks. And maybe that's all any of us are trying to do. Take the broken pieces and build something whole again. Ngat nip nay, fade nak dan. Because in the end, some things aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to be released. And when you finally let them go, That's when you find peace.